I'm Jenni Sefcik, an advocate and counselor at the Greenhouse program with CAWC. And today I'm joined with Angela Moss from the Haymarket Center. And she's going to be discussing with me the relationships between domestic violence and substance abuse and giving us some information on the Haymarket program. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so just getting started, what is your role at Haymarket?
Well, my role at Haymarket is a little bit confusing, but I'll try to clear it up a little bit. I am actually a domestic violence counselor and advocate from Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, CAWC. But I am housed full-time at Haymarket Center to provide traditional domestic violence services. So what I do there, I provide individual sessions, and I provide group counseling to any of the individuals that come into Haymarket that are referred from like their primary counselor there at Haymarket Center. So.
Oh, okay. And how long has the Haymarket Center been around, and how long has it had a domestic violence counselor there?
Well, Haymarket has a pretty interesting history to it, and it's named after the area where it's located, which is Haymarket Center, Haymarket Square, and it's a big history behind that, and it's something if people wanted to Google that part, they can. But CAWC has had an affiliation with Haymarket Center since about 1997, 1998, if I'm not mistaken. And so it actually started as a pilot program, the program that I do at Haymarket Center for CAWC. It started as a pilot program first for about a year or two, and then after that it took off. And so CAWC has been in Haymarket's building for about since 1998, right? And so I'm probably the third counselor in that position at Haymarket Center as a domestic violence counselor and advocate from CAWC.
Okay, all right. And are there similar programs like this in Chicago or throughout the Chicagoland area, or is this an area that seems like it's in need of more services, like the interaction between domestic violence and substance abuse?
Well, the interesting thing about when this program first started with Haymarket Center and CAWC, I think there were like 6 to 8 programs that were a pilot part of the pilot project. But then after a while, for whatever reasons, those other programs dismantled. And so CAWC remained the only collaboration with the Substance Abuse Center. So the rest of them, they fell by the wayside. I'm not even sure why. But it's a good thing that, you know, we have had that longevity with Haymarket to be able to provide those services to all the folks that come through Haymarket Center.
So then do you find that you have, I guess, a large client load then, since it seems like this seems to be a unique program in Chicago for this area? Do you feel like it would benefit if there were more programs like this, or does it seem to be that people they don't know that programs like this exist? Or
I think most people do know that these programs exist, just because, you know, with CAWC we do a lot of advocacy in terms of domestic violence and substance abuse, things like that. So, and because we've been in Haymarket for a while, most people know about our program. And in terms of if there should be more programs, I'm not sure, because it's a really complicated collaboration to have, you know, and you have to have certain staff members to be able to know about the connections between domestic violence and substance abuse, and know how to wear different hats, right? Because you have to be housed in someone else's building, right? So it's kind of like, it's a tough collaboration to have. And so, you know, for some programs, you know, they may feel like they backed out of it because it is so tough, you know, and because of CAWC, the way they train us and the experience that we have as counselor advocates. When you start at one program, you go to another program, you're pretty prepared for such a collaboration to have. So.
Okay, all right. And then what is the Haymarket program like? How is it designed to, I guess, address the interaction between domestic violence and substance abuse, or your position, I guess?
Well, Haymarket is a traditional substance abuse program, right? So they're initially designed to be able to provide treatment services and detox services and and recovery home services to individuals that are struggling with drug and alcohol usage, right? So that's their primary focus. But because Haymarket is such a huge program, they have a lot of different services there to help clients, because once they come into treatment, they are not just suffering from just addiction issues. They have domestic violence issues, and that's kind of where CAWC has come in to help, you know, Haymarket Center be able to help the client address with the clients their domestic violence issues, right? So that's kind of how we collaborate and how, you know, we fit within Haymarket's program.
Okay. All right. And then does Haymarket only serve, I guess, women survivors of domestic violence? Are men also able to access the program? I know this has been a topic that's been being talked about a lot lately in the domestic violence community. I'm just wondering how the Haymarket program works with it.
Well, in terms of the Haymarket program, it is a program. They house women, single women. They house single men. They house women with children. They house women and men that are involved with the criminal justice system. They deal with clients that have DCFS cases. Haymarket is also a dually diagnosed program too. So they deal with clients who have mental health issues, along with substance abuse, along with domestic violence, trauma, and all those different entities, right? So it's a pretty big program in that sense. So they house anyone that is in need of first substance abuse services, and then once they do their intake and their intense assessment, they go ahead and filter them out into the programs that they need to have services with. And so if domestic violence is one of them, then that's what we're there to do. Me in particular, I deal with any victims. So if that victim is a male, I'll deal with a male victim. If that victim is a female, I'll deal with that person. If the victim is someone who identifies as lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and they're a victim, that's who I work with. So I've had a chance to work with a lot of populations. You know, we've had clients who are not where English is not their primary language, right? And because I have, you know, the other area of CAWC that I could reach out to, like Greenhouse with Brenda and some other folks, and then at some of our other sites, if there's a Spanish-speaking person on site, and if I had to lean on those individuals to be able to see how at Haymarket I can help that particular client that doesn't speak English is not their primary language, then that's what I do. Right.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear that it's such an inclusive program. That's amazing. Awesome. I just wanted to remind everybody that if you do have any questions throughout this program, you can always call this number right here. This is the hotline for here, and then the number if you are in need of help for any reason, if you have any issues with domestic violence that you need to talk to somebody, the hotline for CAWC is 773-278-4110. And you can also go to that website at the bottom of the page, www.cawc.org, for any other information. And so going on with this, what does an average service plan entail at Haymarket? So when you meet with clients, do you have clients and you like create a service plan with them, or do you meet with them as like an as needed basis?
Well, when I have a client referral, I basically do the same intake that anyone else across CAWC do. I have some of the same forms, so I do basically the same type of intake, and then included in the intake forms or the folders of records for clients is also a service plan, the same CAWC service plan that most folks have. I have that same service plan, and so on there, some of the primary goals on that service plan would be definitely domestic violence education. Right, so it's either they're going to get the domestic violence education on a one-on-one basis, or they're going to get it inside the group, or both. It just really depends. Also, because you know, I'm a counselor and an advocate, I also can include on that service plan, if that person needed, if they need some case management stuff, I can help with that. If that person needed let's say they needed some daycare information. If that needs to go on the service plan, I can do that. If they need safety planning,
That's a big one, yeah.
I can definitely put that on the service plan, and we can do that. Any kind of outside referrals that person would need, I would do that. For example, sometimes I meet with clients who are survivors of rape and things like that, incest, right? Of course, I'll process that stuff with them, but then on their service plan, they may want to get a referral for that.
Right.
So I will put that on the service plan. So it's just a lot of things that can go on a typical service plan. It depends on what the client would need, but primarily I definitely make sure that I cover the domestic violence piece on the service plan.
Okay, awesome. And then how long do clients usually work with you for? Is it like a couple weeks or months? How long does the service plan go for?
Well, it really depends, because Haymarket is one of those programs where I can get a referral for a client who's coming through detox. Detox can be 3 days, right? So it can just be a 3-day service plan. There's folks that are there for 28 days, 30, 60, and 90 days,
Okay, yeah.
right? So it just really depends on what their length of stay would be, and that would determine how many times we meet and how many times we interact and how much services gets done based on the different programs they're in.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. And what types of treatments? I guess you mentioned you do a lot of like domestic violence education and the group therapies. Do you work with any of the other counselors there and provide treatments together, or is it normally you work on the domestic violence aspect? They might do different specific substance abuse treatment.
So the way the Haymarket is set up, you know, every client that comes in, they meet with their primary addictions counselor, and that person is the individual that is to set up their treatment plan for recovery. And so whatever that would entail for that client in terms of learning about the process of change, pause, different things like that. So their counselor deals with that piece. So they also do things in terms of their DCFS things of that nature, and if it falls down on their DCFS service plan and on their treatment plan with Haymarket, that one of their objectives is to meet with someone for domestic violence services, then that's how I kind of connect with the Haymarket staff, because it's on that service plan and they're referring based on the services needed for that service plan. So I do a lot of collaboration with Haymarket staff in terms of that kind of stuff, because it's necessary.
It seems like it would be.
Right.
It seems like it's such a complicated situation. You would have to work together with a lot of people for that one.
Absolutely. And so when I need to work with that staff for whatever reason, then I do. And sometimes one of the reasons I have to work with them is because I'm not on the unit with the clients all the time. And so sometimes there's misinformation. So in order for me to provide more effective services, I have to collaborate with the staff to be able to say, something doesn't sound right, this and that and the other, can we talk about that?
Right, yeah.
So we're on the same page with things. Okay.
And then you mentioned that Haymarket can house basically anyone who needs service there. Is there also an option for, I guess, an outpatient program? Like, can people come in, meet with counselors, but still live at their own apartments? Or is it primarily just like you come and you stay there for a couple of days?
Well, Haymarket it's a residential program, but they also have an intensive outpatient and an outpatient program connected with their program. So sometimes there's clients that reside somewhere else, and then they receive the outpatient and intensive outpatient services. Or sometimes they're affiliated with another program, like a recovery home that may not offer outpatient or intensive outpatient, so they get referred over to Haymarket's outpatient. And then also Haymarket, like once a client finishes, let's say for example, our 3-day, 28, 60, 30, or 90-day program within Haymarket Residential, their counselor there may recommend that they do intensive or outpatient there at Haymarket anyway.
Okay.
Right.
To help them more. Okay. And then you mentioned referrals. Do you have to be referred to Haymarket, or can you self-admit yourself if you need help?
You can self-admit yourself.
Okay.
Definitely.
That's good to know. That's good. I guess, so getting more into the relationship between domestic violence and substance abuse, what are some of the myths that you've come across that you've had to dispel with either your clients or other members of the community about how substance abuse and domestic violence relate to each other?
Well, one of the things is that I think that sometimes folks feel like because a person's in an abusive relationship and there is addiction there, that the person kind of likes that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is a big myth, you know, and I think sometimes folks combine those two issues together, and I think that's where the faulty thinking comes from, and not looking at them as two separate issues.
Right.
Right. Another myth that I have with people, even clients sometimes, like if me and my partner, if we become sober, like the violence is gonna stop.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is another myth. Right, because sometimes I let the clients know. Well, I let the clients know that you have to work on both issues together. You know, you can't work on one without the other, because you can have an abuser that's clean and sober, that still is violent.
Right.
Right.
That's also a myth that we deal with in just like the greenhouse program. You know, clients will tell us, oh, it's just because he drinks a lot and that's why he's abusive, when at the end of the day, drinking doesn't cause abusive behavior. Look at all the people on the weekends who go out to the bars and they have fun. They're not all abusive to everybody that they see. They're not all abusive to their partners. But I guess it doesn't excuse abusive behavior. It's not the reason the abuse is happening. It might exacerbate the abuse and make it worse. But if once the drinking's taken away, it's still probably going to happen.
Exactly. Another myth that I've heard people say before, that alcohol and drugs cause violence to happen, right? Which is something like, again, like you said, that's not true. It's not true. So.
Right. So what are some examples that you could think of that just show the interaction between substance abuse and domestic violence? Like, how does domestic violence affect someone who has a pre-existing substance abuse problem, or how does substance abuse affect someone who's like already in a domestic violence situation? What could you explain? Could you explain a little bit about how those interact?
Sure. Sometimes you may have, and it's just my experience, sometimes you may have a victim who doesn't use drugs and alcohol, but in order to cope with the stress of that relationship and to numb, that person may start out as a casual drinker or a casual smoker, like of marijuana or something, but then find out that those two things help them to be able to cope with the stress and the drama in the relationship, so they end up drinking more or smoking more marijuana, if that's what their drug of choice would be, to kind of deal with that. But also they deal with it not just to handle the stress, but sometimes to fall asleep, because abusive people are pretty cruel. Sometimes abusive people, they feel like if I can't sleep, you're not going to sleep. And so now a victim is often sleep deprived. So sometimes they feel like I may have a drink or glass of wine or some marijuana or whatever, because I can go to sleep. Right? To help them function. Right? When they're in that kind of relationship. Then you have other victims who have already had some kind of issue with drugs or alcohol. But then, of course, again, with that same stress or that same worry, those issues escalate, where they have gone from, misuse to abuse of the substance, right? And not really realizing that that thing that they're using to cope is one of those issues where you're going to pay big time later for it. Right? Because sometimes folks don't know the consequences of using, abusing drugs and alcohol. So.
And they can have some pretty heavy consequences later on. That's very true. So how does one begin to address or try to help their client overcome this particular situation? Can you, I guess, when you start working with somebody, do you just say, okay, well, let's forget about the substance abuse and just worry about the domestic violence? Or do you have to kind of tackle them both together?
Well, in my experience, I feel like that I have to tackle them together. And that's just how I deal with it with clients. While I'm working at Haymarket, I let them know that there are separate issues, but they both have to be addressed. For example, I might have a client that says to me, well, I have, if I stop using, then our relationship is going to be good. But that client doesn't want to talk about the violence that happened in their relationship, right? And that's probably because sometimes the abuser says that you're the problem. Because of your drugs and alcohol, that's why I hit you, that's why I yell at you, and that's why I do things, because you can't control your liquor or your drugs, right? So I kind of put both of those issues on the table and we talk about them, right? And then it's up to the client to kind of look through all that information that we discussed and process and figure out which one are you going to deal with first, which one are you going to deal with together, and can you deal with them together, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I deal with that issue and situation. And because Haymarket is they have dually diagnosed clients there, sometimes I have to help the clients filter through the mental health stuff before they can even get to the domestic violence stuff or substance abuse issues, right? And then you have also those same clients that have other traumas besides domestic violence. Sometimes they have sexual assault, sometimes they have been separated from their children, they have grief and loss issues, like that kind of stuff. So I kind of have to feel out where the client's at with those things and maybe address some of that before we can even get to the domestic violence stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of got to start where the client is at. You know, even though my primary goal is to provide domestic violence education and things of that nature, but I also know that it's really not about what I feel is priority. It's about what the client feels is priority on those issues, right? So.
And it's very true in domestic violence. It's so interrelated to so many other problems. It's like this big umbrella issue that has so many other things underneath it. You can have issues with like your parents, with your partner, with your children, with, you know, friends, with other family members. You know, there's so many different facets that you have to address. I can imagine it gets very complicated.
And then, you know, you also have clients that have domestic violence issues, but they also have, you know, because they've been using drugs and alcohol, they have been trafficked. You know, they have been sexually abused, they have been raped, and things like that, and their addiction. So, you know, they come, you know, to Haymarket with those kinds of issues too, and you have to be able to help them filter through that kind of stuff too. Folks don't think about that addiction brings a whole nother world. Just like domestic violence does.
And since you mentioned the sex trafficking, I have heard a lot more in the domestic violence field about, you know, targeting services towards sex trafficking, labor trafficking. So again, if you are experiencing anything that you think might be related to this, you're looking for help, call this number on the screen that goes to our hotline, and then you can always visit that website down there, and we can always help you find services that can help you out. And then I guess my last question for you would just be, do you have a client whose story or journey with you is particularly memorable?
I do have a client that, really quickly, because it's about that time, but I have a client who was within Haymarket program for about 7 months, and during that time she accomplished a lot of things. You know, she was able to work through her trafficking issues, she was able to work through her PTSD issues, her domestic violence issues, her issues with her children, just a lot of different things that, you know, I think in collaboration with the Haymarket staff and myself that we were able to help her, you know, to kind of, you know, heal you know, in that sense, because we were really supportive to her based on what her needs were. And, you know, she went back home. She still calls me every now and then, or I call her as a follow-up to see if everything's going on with her and her children. So.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Angela, again, for being
You're
with
welcome.
us. I hope everyone was able to learn a little bit more about Haymarket. Again, if you need any help, call that number. I'll put it one more time. And thank you again for watching Hotline 21.